In this lesson, we're going to do a quick review of the languages and technologies that are at play in the first introductory web app. The document you're looking at in my Emacs editor is technologies.txt, and it's a simple summary of what we've seen so far. So we've seen different languages and different technologies. Let's do a very quick review. To begin, in the input.html page, we had basically straight HTML with a little bit of embedded styling. I'll get to that in a moment. It was an HTML document, and HTML, of course, is good for structuring information, field sets, lists, and so forth, and providing I/O controls, text boxes, buttons, and the like. And all of this is well suited, of course, when the client application is a browser. In other words, the client is using a browser to go against a web app. The web app typically delivers up HTML in some form or other back to the browser for display. The dominant example in the first web app was the field set. As the name suggests, it's a collection of fields. Embedded in that, a form. Embedded in the form, there's a text box. And that's at this line. You can see input type equals text. And there's also a button for submitting the data in the form. In general, a form would have more input controls than this. You might have drop-down lists and all of that good stuff. We're not going to do a rigorous, precise survey of each and every control available in HTML. The HTML is going to be introduced by example. I assume that as modern programmers, you've all had some acquaintance with HTML and you have a basic reading knowledge of it. We'll refine that through various examples. The first web app also uses cascading style sheets, CSS. The current version, by the way, is 3. In best practices, a style sheet would be broken out into a separate file, perhaps into several files. But it's so simple in the first example that I just encapsulate it in the HTML document in the Styles section. And you can see that here. I set a color for the legend in the field set. I set some properties on the input button and on the input text box, and also on the width of the field set. We'll get into richer examples eventually, and of course we'll see CSS files broken out separately. There's no JavaScript in the first example, but certainly we'll get there. We did, of course, need a web server. Tomcat, quite excellent, or Jetty, also quite excellent, could be used. Tomcat is what I used in this example. And for us, the important thing is we deploy a web app to Tomcat or to Jetty by putting a WAR file in the web apps directory or one of its subdirectories. By the way, undeploying and redeploying are also straightforward. You undeploy by removing the WAR file. You redeploy by overwriting an existing WAR file. Very intuitive, very straightforward. You never, by the way, need to restart Tomcat or Jetty in order to undeploy or redeploy. Now, the first app had dynamic content. In other words, content generated through code. So we needed some place to put the code. I embedded all of the code in the JSP page. That, again, is not best practices. But to begin, in a very simple app, it's the easiest way to go, and so I did that. And I used only old-style JSP, in other words, version 1.x. I had 3 coding constructs in that example. The first one you see here, this is a declaration. Basically, I'm just declaring 2 fields, as I would in a regular Java class. They're called far and cent. They're of type float. They represent, of course, the Fahrenheit and centigrade temperatures. Then there's a little scriptlet. Conceptually, these 3 statements are the body of a method. That's what they're going to become when this JSP page is translated into a servlet instance. And finally, for convenience, this is an expression, old style, JSP 1.x, and it's used to write a response back to the client. So this basically just summarizes the conversion information. Now, on the web client side, we've seen that, of course. I was using a browser, in particular Chrome. Pick whatever browser best suits your purposes that you like. Any modern browser will do. I'd also strongly recommend the curl command line utility. And let me go all the way over here just to emphasize that here's the URL in case you don't have curl installed. It's available on every modern platform. Curl is a convenient alternative to a browser for doing preliminary checks. I find in development mode, I'm using the curl utility almost as much as I'm using a browser to hit a web app. So that's a quick review of the technologies in play so far. What we're going to do is look at some other infrastructure and at the same time push that first introductory example forward. We're going to refine it, we're going to add some error control, and so forth.